Welcome. I'm Sylvia Peregrino, and this is Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Today, I'm honored to have Miss Melissa Lopez. She's the Executive Director for DMRS, Diocesan Migrant Refugee Services. Welcome, Melissa.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're still in this COVID-19 situation, so we're virtual, but thank you for joining us, even if it's virtual. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you went to school.
So I'm born and raised in El Paso. I went to LBJ, which is a school that is no more on the west side. It's been combined to create a bigger middle school. And then Moorhead Middle School and Coronado High School. I went to college here at UTEP and then decided that, well, I always knew I wanted to be an attorney. So I left El Paso and went to law school at UT Austin. Spent 3 years there and then came back home. I always knew that El Paso was where I wanted to be. You know, so many of my high school friends especially would say, oh, El Paso, and complain about El Paso, but I always felt like, you know, the best way to make El Paso better is to stay here and work towards improving it. So born and bred. I have been working at DMRS since I graduated from law school, so August of 2007. And I've been the director now for almost 8 years. And so I don't get to have as much fun as I used to with cases, doing casework, but I do what I think is really important work in making sure that the organization continues to run and that we have a place for people to come when they need help with their immigration cases.
And could you tell us a little bit about the history of DMRS? What's your agency's mission?
Sure. So we are here to help immigrants. Our mission is to serve immigrants in the spirit of gospel values. And so that means everything from helping them with their legal cases, but also doing advocacy work within the community. You know, for a lot of people, there may not be much that we can do in terms of their legal case, but there's a lot that we can do in terms of advocating for them, for getting them longer periods to stay in the United States before they have to leave, or getting them some kind of temporary status. And so we really focus on that. DMRS is a ministry of the Catholic Church here in El Paso. We were founded in 1986 and have grown and added programs throughout the years. You know, initially the agency was a response to the things that were happening in Central America in the 80s, you know, the mass exodus in the 80s from Central America. And then eventually we started doing work with survivors of domestic violence. And then slowly started to do more work with people in deportation proceedings. And now we have a pretty robust program that we do a lot of different things. We work with the children that are detained by the Immigration Service. We also work with adults in detention, providing Know Your Rights presentations and helping them better understand the situation that they're facing or that they will face in court, and helping them be informed so that when they go to court, they can make the best possible decisions for themselves.
Okay, so those are some of your services that you offer. How has this COVID-19 situation changed the way you work with the clients?
I mean, it's completely changed it. You know, a good percentage of the people that we serve are elderly. We work with a lot of people who have been residents for a really long time, have never applied for naturalization, and now they want to do that. And we have had to go from being able to help those individuals here in the office to having to work with them over the phone, having to do all of our work by email or by Zoom, which for a lot of our clients has been difficult. You know, we've thankfully been able to do a lot of DACA work, DACA applications in the last few months, a lot of renewing of residency cards. But there are other things that are harder to do. You know, for example, some of the survivors of the Walmart shooting, you know, we have worked with them, and it's really hard it's difficult enough to make a survivor relive, you know, probably some of the worst times in their lives. And then to have to do that over the phone or by video is really, really difficult. You put people in a very vulnerable position, and yet you're not really there to support them in a profound way, other than, you know, trying to walk them through that process. And so I think in that way, it's really affected us. We've also had to change the way that we do things like mailing applications. You know, the Immigration Service is accepting electronic signatures, thankfully, but we're doing a lot of mailing things to clients for them to sign and then having them send them back. So we are doing our best to adapt, but it's definitely not been easy. I'm in the office because there's often at times a need to have somebody here to make sure that things can continue moving forward. Mail needs to be processed, both incoming and outgoing. So we're doing our best, and you know, I'm really proud of our whole team. I think everybody has really stepped up to the challenge and is doing their best to try and deal with a difficult situation.
So if somebody needed immigration services, what would be the process to try to get services from your organization?
So the way that things work right now is if you need help with an immigration case, you call our main number, which is 915-532-3975. And then what happens is that our receptionists, our administrative team, I guess I should say, will figure out what type of case the individual has, which department is best to handle it, and then go through the process of qualifying the individual for free legal services. That's probably one of the more difficult things to do online. Obviously, people are hesitant to share too much information, you know, personal information online or through, you know, they've never met us, they're calling our office, and then suddenly we're asking them for pay stubs, and we're asking them for, you know, proof of assets or bank statements or bills. And so, you know, as you can imagine, they're nervous, but we screen them for free legal services, and then they get assigned to one of our staff for further processing, and the staff will do an intake with them. And then, you know, we figure out from there what options a person has and what next steps should be taken.
So if somebody qualifies for free legal services, it's usually if they're at poverty level, or
it depends on the grant, actually. Different grants have different qualifications. For example, some of our crime victims grants are a little bit more generous, so it's 175% of poverty guidelines. For the average grant, it's going to be 125% of poverty guidelines based on the number of people in your household. And that's really important because, for example, if you live with a family member but you're paying rent, that family member is not part of your household. So in roommate situations, we're not counting your roommate's income against yours. We're just looking at your income. And that's really important because, you know, we have a lot of, especially right now with COVID, a lot of people that have had to change their living situations to be able to make ends meet. And so it's really important that people explain those things to us when they're calling in and qualifying, that I live with my brother, but I pay him $300 a month in rent. And then we consider that to be a separate household.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And is there an initial consultation fee?
If you qualify, so the reason that we do the free legal services screening first is because if you qualify for free legal services, we don't charge you anything. The only thing that you're responsible for paying is the immigration application fees if you don't qualify for a fee waiver. But everything else is completely free. So we don't charge you a consultation fee. We don't charge you anything. And that's one of the things that's really important for people to understand is the immigration system has changed so much in the last, in the last 6 months, much less the last 3 years. And so it's really important that even if you've had a consultation before, that you have a new one. And if it can be free, then you don't lose anything by having that consultation.
I know that before COVID, I was teaching volunteering in a citizenship class that we had at the community college. And I know one of the questions that I would get, and again, similar to what you're saying, a lot of people that have been here a long time and because of the political situation now want to become US citizens. But one thing that I remember that they would ask me, and then I'd always think, oh, I need to email Melissa and ask her. But since I have you now in person, tell us about, there's this new rule about the public charge. How would that impact people?
So the new public charge rules are incredibly complicated. There's basically what they're looking for is that the test for whether or not you will become a public charge is much more intense than it ever was before. There's an entirely separate form that needs to be completed, and there's an assessment that has to be done of each individual person. The way that somebody explained it in a conference that I was at last week is that before, they used to look at the US citizens or the permanent resident. In other words, the person that's trying to bring you to the United States, they would look at their ability to support you as the main factor in determining whether or not you were going to become a public charge. Now it's the reverse. So they're looking to see, do you, as the immigrant that's coming to the United States, what we call the intending immigrant, what about your situation indicates that you will or will not be a public charge? And so they're looking at things like, have you gotten public benefits before? Have you, are you likely to get public benefits? Do you have insurance? Do you have a job? Do you have assets that you can rely on? And so public charge has become a really complicated thing for anybody wanting to come to the United States. But for those that are already residents, typically it should not be as big of a factor for them. So if I'm applying for naturalization, it shouldn't be as impactful to me as it will be to my family members. For most residents, they don't qualify for any sort of benefits for the first 5 years that they're residents. After that, they can get some benefits. And which benefits, for example, Social Security retirement is not considered a benefit, but if you get Social Security, SSI, I believe is considered a public benefit because it's to supplement your income. It's a cash benefit. Things like TANF, which is a cash benefit, is considered public benefits. But if you get, let's say you get into a car accident and you have to have emergency Medicaid, the hospital gets it because you're in a life-threatening situation and they need that to be able to save your life. That doesn't count. So the most important thing with public benefits is that the public benefits that count against you are public benefits you've received since October of last year. And so it's really important that anybody who is applying to become a resident of the United States and has received benefits, that they speak to an immigration attorney to have their situation assessed, because it's very complicated. I think even there's a training that we're going through right now about the new public charge rules, and they're doing it over the course of a month because it's so complicated.
Wow.
So yeah, gives you just a little bit of piece of how complicated the situation really is.
I know one concern that my students had, and these were usually like middle age or older moms, is that sometimes their children who are U.S. citizens had Medicaid or were getting food stamps, and so they were worried that that might impact them negatively. But would it look bad on them, or because it's for their children? Or maybe if they have a U.S. citizen spouse, if they are the ones asking for benefits, it wouldn't affect them in a negative way.
Well, the other thing too is that to remember is that those benefits are for the children, right? And so typically the immigrant is specifically excluded from, if you look at the award letters, the immigrants are specifically excluded. And I think that was the big, the thing that we saw once these new rules were announced is we saw a lot of people dropping their food stamp benefits. And especially right now in the time of COVID, you know, if you drive past any of the food banks, the lines are just really, really long. And so rather than drop benefits that could be beneficial to you, the best thing is to have a conversation again with an attorney to figure out if there's a way for you to maintain those benefits. As I understand it, in general, cash benefits are the ones that are going to hurt you. Benefits in goods, not so much. So for example, the SNAP benefits, the food benefits, generally are not going to be as negative as TANF, the cash benefit, would be. But of course, you want to be careful. You know, if those benefits are not necessary, then it's probably best for your immigration case not to receive them. But if they are necessary, if you need those benefits to feed your kids, then have a conversation with an immigration attorney to figure out how those might affect you. And again, keeping in mind that the ones that are receiving the benefits are those US citizens, not the immigrant themselves.
What about, since we're on the same topic, what about WIC? Since I saw that the city just reopened 2 of the WIC centers, which is the Women, Infant, and Children program.
Right. WIC, WIC can be a benefit that can affect you. Again, it depends. It's the way that this new test works is it's a kind of a totality of the circumstances. And so they look at kind of everything that you have. They look at your income. They look at your educational background is one of the things they look at. They look at your potential to be employed. And so some of those things aren't necessarily going to exclude you. For example, if you got WIC while you were pregnant, which is quite common, then perhaps, you know, they see that as more of a limited term scope situation. But it's a totality of the circumstances. And so it's really difficult to say this one thing will make you ineligible or this one thing will make you eligible, because it's really kind of looking at everything. The form itself is something like 20 plus pages long. And so it really is complicated and not, you know, an easy, straightforward kind of answer. And again, it's all going towards the question of, could you potentially become a public charge on the government?
And so that form is something that now anybody who's trying to come to the U.S. to become a legal permanent resident would have to now also fill out or be subject to?
Exactly. It's an additional form that's now been added to the vast array of forms that you have to fill out when you are applying for immigration status. And so, you know, certainly it's one of the big ones. It's called a Declaration of Self-Sufficiency, and it depends on whether you're applying in the United States or you're applying to become a resident through Mexico. But the form is, I just pulled it up, 18 pages long. And again, it asks you a wide array of different questions: income tax, household income, the number of people living in your house, whether you're a student or employed, all of those things. You know, do you have, what kind of debts do you have? What kind of income do you have? What kind of assets do you have? So they even actually ask for a credit score, the new form. So again, it really is somewhat somewhat complicated, very complicated. The members of our team that have already worked on this form have said that this form takes longer to complete than the whole residency packet itself, just because there's a lot of information to it.
And so again, this is something that that came out with this new administration that they
Yes.
wanted to include. So potentially, if we had a change in administration, they could decide to get rid of this form or keep it as it is.
So, I mean, I think what makes the most sense to me is, let's go back to the system that we had before, that everybody felt was really crystal clear, which puts the responsibility of support on the U.S. citizen or permanent resident, because that system allows for you to, as the U.S. citizen, to be able to get somebody else to help you support. For example, if you have somebody who you know, is in school. Let's say that you have a US citizen who's still going to college, and so, but their parents help support them. Then you can include that in their support as part of the overall package. And so my hope is that we'll get away from this form and go back to the system that we had before, which really didn't penalize people for receiving benefits for their US citizen. I mean, it was very clear before that if the benefit was for your US citizen child, that it didn't count against you. And this current system is less clear, and actually in some ways very clear that those things could be harmful to you.
Okay, and so I know that was a lot on the public charge rule, but good to know in case people are trying to sponsor their relative or their significant other.
Yes.
And so I wanted to also talk about something that I read in the news that I wanted to know if maybe you heard about. I read that the U.S. Customs Agency, the Citizenship Office, gave up their contract to print cards, to print like their the green cards.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you're seeing delays in, or are things just delayed right now because of COVID? Because I'm sure they're working from home as well.
You know what was interesting is that during COVID, we saw a lot of cases actually moving forward. There was a huge backlog in cases, and then during COVID, it felt like they were really kind of catching up on a lot of the adjudications of these cases, which was really encouraging. What has happened is that USCIS is a self-funding agency. They don't get congressional appropriations because they charge fees. So, you know, their fees should cover the work that they do. The more applications they receive, the more fees they receive, and thus the more money they have to be able to provide services. And what has happened is that USCIS has said that they are going to run out of money without congressional appropriations in August. And so they have talked about, they've talked publicly about having to furlough 13,000 of their staff, which is I think 3/4 of their staff. And so what they did was the cards were being printed by a contractor. And so what they did was they allowed that contract to lapse in favor of saving the money. but that meant that nobody was printing cards. They have, I think late last week, it was announced that they actually would be resuming the printing of the cards. It wasn't clear to me whether that would be through a contractor or that they would be doing them themselves. You know, years ago when I first became an immigration attorney, it would take quite a bit of time, a month or two, from the time your case got approved until you got your card. And then within the last probably 5-6 years, it got to the point where your residency application would get approved on Monday, and you might have a card within a week or two, by the end of that week or early the following week. And so I think, unfortunately, what this may mean is that we just go back to the system that we had before, where there's just these huge delays in the cards. For residency, I think there are other ways to prove that you are a resident. There's different things that we can do for people, but I think that the delay in printing of cards is especially problematic for work permits. There's no substitute for the work permit card if you are somebody who is working. So let's say that you are a survivor of domestic violence. You have an application you had your work permit, you file to renew it, and then it gets approved, but you don't get the actual card before your old one expires. What are you supposed to give your employer? What do you give your boss to prove that you actually still are able to work in the United States? I know that I've written letters for people before explaining this is the approval notice to show that it's been approved. Unfortunately, the card has not come in yet, but it depends on the employer what documentation they'll take. So that is really, really problematic, to have a delay in the production of the cards.
And so we're almost coming towards the end of our first show. I did want to continue the conversation with you and talk about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, because I often encounter students that are in that situation. But I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add that maybe we haven't talked about.
No, I think we've hit on a lot of stuff. I mean, I think you know, immigration's always been incredibly complicated. I think the thing about the current administration is that they've made it that much more complicated. I think even for us as immigration attorneys, it's really hard to keep up with what's happening. And we try and do training as much as we can. I spent all of last week in a conference, but so much of it is still up in the air. And then if we have a new administration, things completely change. And so, you know, I think that the really important thing is for people to get a good consultation with an immigration attorney or an accredited representative, and make sure that they are getting sound information about the best way forward in their case.
And so, just, you know, to close, could you give us the phone number again that people would need to call if they were interested in getting some help from DMRS?
Sure. The telephone number is 915-532-3975.
Okay, and so thank you for being here with us. We
Sure.
will continue the conversation, and thank you for the work that your organization does here in El Paso.